Hello, this is the Sci-Fi show or Griffin Flyer once again. Uh, another debate, another day, another debate. Now, I wasn't really interested in uploading this debate. I had originally, kind of wanted to, but at the end of it, I was just like, well, there's no point, you know. And it's the most recent debate I had with Surgeon Sergio, I think his name was. And at that point, I was like, I should start cataloging my debates because it's fun. I do it because it's fun. I like having fun. But this video is: can great swords beat the Chaos Warriors of Khorne? As you can see, these Chaos Warriors of Khorne, you know, pretty armored boys. They're pretty tough looking. Against regular Zweihanders. Okay, it's not really relevant, but actually, they don't look all that armored. But no, they're pretty armored. They're pretty armored. They are fairly armored. I know the video itself is poor quality because of my own video settings, but trust me, they are very well armored, even if it doesn't look it. But original comment says units like great swords having a lot of armor piercing is so funny to me. Like IRL, swords are garbage at penetrating plate armor. And that is one of the most common myths. Look up the channel Dequidim on YouTube. I might include a link to his channel. He does have a couple videos on why the sword is the best melee weapon against armor. And he is a lot more knowledgeable than anyone, including me, in this channel, in this comment thread. And I leave a comment. You can have Sword of Great Sword. Really short, simple, to the point. You can have Sword of Great Sword. That makes it pretty good against armor. It's actually, a very good weapon against armor when you half sword it, which is, the great part about swords. You can do pretty much anything you want with them. You can use the Mordhau, you can use the tip of it. You're very maneuverable, and one of the things that the problems, right, that polearms have, these longer weapons have, is that they have an effective range, right? And once you get underneath that effective range, they are a lot less effective. And the great thing about the sword is, because it's not as long, you can actually use it as sort of a shorter polearm, and you have that advantage of leverage. And you not only have that advantage of leverage, but you also have the advantage of flexibility, right? You can maneuver it into different positions without it intercepting your body or interfering with or being interfered with by your body. And some guy, which is the person that we are debating, says that still doesn't make it good at its job, just not completely useless. And I say, look up the channel Dequidim. Most swords are plenty good against armor. You just have to use a little skill. It's not like a hammer automatically counters full plate either. And unlike with a sword, you can't slip it into an eye slit or an arm joint. And he says, no, you have to go to grapple and wedge the point in like a dagger. If you go to grapple in a battle with multiple combatants, you get trampled by the other fighters. A hammer in this case actually lets you use it like a hammer, even if the result is denting the other guy's armor. You can do that with a great sword as well. It's a very long, very heavy. It's not that heavy. It's about 4 kilograms, I think, generally. You can still do that with a great sword, and as a bonus, it doesn't slow you down defensively, right? One of the big problems with a heavy hammer, a two-handed hammer, a mace or a maul, is that they are heavier and they're a little slower than a sword, right? A little less easy to control, because a sword, with the balance of a sword, is near the hand, the hand area, the hilt, and because that weight is so low and so close to your hand, you can actually maneuver it around very quickly. And then, as soon as an opening pops up, as soon as, let's say, you parry a strike, you can quickly rotate your sword and smash him in the head with the handle of your weapon, your greatsword. Or you can also stab him with the point if you are half swording. And I brought those points up And I said, don't pretend grappling never happened in combat. It's not like Jiu-Jitsu, Pankration, and Ringen were developed just for fun. And that is true. Jiu-Jitsu, Pankration, not so much, but Jiu-Jitsu and Ringen were both developed specifically for combat, specifically for use in combat. Or at least the ancestors of Jiu-Jitsu. So using your longsword as a bad hammer then? Again, it's not a bad hammer. It's a decent hammer. People will complain about the hand being difficult to uh, keep steady on the handle of the blade itself. And Skelegrim has an excellent video demonstrating that no, you can actually Mordhau pretty easily, and it's not comfortable, but it's certainly not dangerous to your hand. And that's not counting the fact that you can use gloves. All these grappling styles were developed for a reason. Yeah, that reason was fighting one guy in an alley, not two groups of 10 fighting in a great gang brawl. Take one guy to the ground and his friends thank you for immobilizing yourself as they kick all your rapes in. And then my refutation was, again, even in the scenario that you're describing, one swordsman on the ground, grappling and probably killing the guy with a hammer, are your guys with swordsmen, your swordsmen, are your brothers, are they not going to back you up? They would. So, and I will later provide a quote specifically regarding his claim that grappling is a desperation move. Fior de Libri. Oh, I did provide a direct quote, but I provided sources. Fior de Liberi. I'm not going to pronounce that correctly, but grappling wasn't rare. It was integral to medieval combat training. Arts like German Ringen were taught alongside swordsmanship specifically for battlefield use, and that is correct. So 10 versus 10, learn to read. So this guy's being a little smartass, right? This guy's being a little smug. I don't like that. I don't know. I think I was pretty polite. Well, maybe not. I guess I wasn't too polite. Yeah. Well, I'll leave it up to you guys. Was that polite or not? Please tell me about how you can't Mordau. I would love to read that. A little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of bite. All right. He's giving what he's getting. We're not going to hold that against him. Let's see. Learn to read. The other fighters don't even need to turn their attention to you, so them enough for them to step on your arm or neck by accident with their armored boots. Is your arm or neck not armored? They should be if we're talking about full plate. And he says these strategies were used in combat as desperation attempts because it's better than doing nothing and dying. We're gonna get into that later. Bludgeon with a blade, you could at that point they're disabled that much, the soldiers could just pull out their dagger. I mean, that's the neat part about his Y-hander or any sword in general. You don't really have to pull out a dagger. You can just half sword it directly into their eye slit, finish them off. They carried them for a reason. Yeah, they did, and I will talk about that reason later on in this quote, later on in the video. As for lance necks, you mean the guys that also use pikes, halberds, and early firearms, those guys. Yes, I think I was pretty clear on that. Why do you elite lance necks, right? That's the qualifier right there. Zweihanders are fantastic at area denial and unarmored opponents. I mean, yeah, they are. If someone with plate did right up, they technically could still work. That's kind of a concession, right? That is kind of a concession, right? That yes, they are still good at against armor. They could technically still work. Yes, they could, absolutely. But all their tools were still better for that purpose. I mean, yes and no, right? Yes and no. I would argue that, halberd is definitely better than a Zweihander if you're going up against an armored knight who is mounted. But I think once you're on the ground, I would say definitely not. Because a halberd, and this is something that is talked a lot about in, there's this one, well, I don't have the source on me, and I really should have, but there was this one, I think it was Spanish, it might have been Swiss, Renaissance expert that was not expert, contemporary historian, battle. I don't know. What do you call someone who does a lot of fencing? A fencer, I guess. Duelist, fighter, mercenary. There we go. He was talking about how the problem with the halberd is it's too short to participate in the push a pike, but at the same time it is too long to participate in the pell mell. or in German, the word they have for it in German is the sword strike, right? The sword striking, um, which is a very evocative name, isn't it? But that is the problem that was outlined when talking about halberds. That being said, halberds were still used fairly decently late into the Renaissance. So I don't think his critiques are that valid. I do think at the end of the day, it is probably your best weapon for defeating cavalry, and I think Total War Warhammer represents that very well by making halberds much more useful than Zweihanders against cavalry, which is I think completely fair. I think Zweihanders are yeah, and but that being said, if you're talking about guys on foot, the Zweihander is going to be a lot better just because of how much more useful it is in the Pell which is something I should have brought up, but I didn't really. Yes, I do mean those guys, the guys who the Empire of Man was directly based on. If you read my comment carefully, learn to read, you'd see I wrote the Zweihander was used by elite Lancenecks in real life and actual battles, despite being more expensive. You might notice there's an elite modifier in front of that Lanceneck, then guess what? The soldiers with the Zweihander got double pay. Almost as if they were elite. Zweihanders are fantastic at area denial. Yes, that is true. Quick question though: how many unarmored opponents would you see on a Renaissance battlefield? None. That's right. So to recap, they were paying extra for these swords and being paid extra. I wonder why. Could it be that these swords are actually good on the battlefield? Now I gotta ask: have you read any manuals by Fior de Libri, Johannes? I'm not pronouncing that, or Judd? Do you know who these people are and why I might be bringing them up? And the answer is because these people wrote treatises on how to fight, right? And all of them have very long and very detailed sections on swords, both in unarmored and armored combat. He says full armor was rare on Renaissance battlefields. Yes and no, right? You would see a lot of heavy cavalry. The French in general tended to use a lot of full plate. But in the context of Lancenecks, yes, that is correct. You are not going to see a lot of full plate. And then he goes, if you think this is sufficient for the depiction of armored in this video, I have questions. We're not going to talk about I do HEMA. Have you ever picked up a sword? That's an unfalsifiable claim. I have my doubts. I have done both fencing, I've done kendo, and I've done a little bit of LARPing. But the point that he's making is if that sufficient for the depiction of armored. Now, this is kind of a iffy thing to debate on because, yes, I don't think I would agree that, yes, the Zweihander is not maybe as effective as Total War describes it as being, where it's maintaining half of its effectiveness. Actually, no. I think half is completely fair now that I think about it. But the way that they are animated, I don't think is very good. They're animated as swinging, right? And in real life, we would see a lot more half sorting and a lot more Mordhau, especially against armored opponents, which is not what is being depicted. But another thing I wanted to bring up: these elite greatswords are in the game have 95 armor, which is a very heavily armored unit. It's armored, right? And I do think that them having even more than half effectiveness against units armored in that sense, like these great swords are depicted, I think is completely fair. Uh, Maybe not so much against plate. Maybe I would knock it down maybe to 33% against effectiveness, maybe against full plate. But at the end of the day, it's a lot more effective than what he's letting on, in the sense that he's saying that it's are absolute garbage. Absolutely not. Which is why I made the comment. All right. And here is the quote that I am talking about. Oh, hang on. Let's say this. Oh yeah, it is kind of a straw man. He does say that full armor was rare on Renaissance battlefields. That is kind of a straw man. I never said that. Uh, okay. And if you truly did HEMA, you'd know how important grappling is, right? That is a counterpoint I made. But we don't have to ask you. Why don't we ask what, and I repeated my sources, have to say about grappling? Again, you're completely ignoring virtually every manuscript we have from contemporary sources about warfare. Your statement that grappling was used only as desperation attempts disqualifies you on an expert on Renaissance era warfare. Every manuscript and contemporary author I've read on the subject would vehemently disagree with you. And that is correct. Grappling was very high. And I did get this direct quote from Castilian Knight Juan. I'm not saying that. And okay, so the quote goes, and you must hold your lance in your hand, place in the pouch, setting off at the gallop, placing your lance, aim for the enemy's belly. Once the lance is broken, you take hold of the estoc, which is a kind of long, thin sword uh, that is two-handed, right? So I do think that's a very fair comparison to a greatsword, because the major difference between an estoc and a greatsword, yes, an estoc is slightly thicker, and that does make it better at piercing, but at the same time, you can half sword a greatsword, and it's still going to be relatively stiff enough to worm your way around armor, right? And in some places, in some contexts, the flexibility of the sword itself is a benefit in the sense of helping get through and get around armor. Okay. You should take hold of the estoc, which is strapped onto the left-hand side of the front arcon, and fighting, strike at the visor in the voids. After you've lost it or broken it, take hold of your arming sword. Fighting again, you shall, and then once you've lost or broken that, you take hold of the hammer, reaching down, blah blah blah. With hammer in hand, you do what you can until you lose it. After that is lost, you shall draw your dagger, and you shall grapple with all of these weapons. Now, that's a very key point. You shall grapple with all of these weapons. You are trying to grapple with everything, right? Even with the estoc, you're going for the grapple. Even with the arming sword, you're going for the grapple. With the estoc or sword, okay, so he clarifies. Now, obviously, you're not going to grapple with a lance, but with the estoc, sword, and hammer, you will grapple. So his claim that grappling is a desperation attempt or something you do if you're desperate, completely not true. And again, when we're talking about fully, this is in the context of fully armored mounted knights, and he does say that, hey, that's not really relevant to lance necks. I would argue that in the context of when we're talking about how effective swords are against armor, the fact that he says, hey, the estoc and the arming sword are both more effective than the warhammer, right? Uh, that should clue you in that, hey, yes, swords are effective against armor, which, if you will notice, was the original point of our debate. Are swords absolute garbage at penetrating armor? Uh, yes, in the sense of you can't go through a breastplate directly with a sword, but no, in the sense that you can't do anything, right? You have the ability to have sword, and you have the ability to go for the visor. You have the ability to go for the voids, which is to say the armpits and the crotch. If you can provide a single quote from a contemporary expert to contradict this quote, I will concede defeat and shame, but you won't. Why? Because no such quote exists. Even the lowest of the low would have a Gamerson. Okay, you completely missed the context of this entire conversation. The discussion is whether greatsword units deserve the armor piercing tag. Armor piercing is for units that are good against enemies with an armor of 80 or higher. Gamerson's not 80 or higher. Gamerson's like 30. Well, we would also expect to see half plate, right? And I know some people don't like the term half plate. We would see breastplates, Curse over Chain and Gamberson is 50. Yes and no, right? In the context of the infantry state troopers, it is, but in the context of great swords, it is not, which doesn't make sense to me. And I think him and I can agree that is completely asinine. Great swords are not even remotely a go-to against plate. Again, not true. Talking about arming sword, I think the arming sword is a completely fair comparison, right? And the S-Stock is also a pretty fair comparison, and both of these are from 1548, so we're talking about full plate. And again, he's saying, yes, you should use this against full plate, above the Warhammer even. Okay. All right. And my comment basically repeats what I said, so I don't really need to cover it. Okay, so we're talking about whether a game, and he goes on this huge spaghetti about how armor works in the game. Obviously, we know how armor works in the game. It's We're on a video about Warhammer. I play the game myself. I know how it works. The no coast to counter, no shit, because our manuals aren't written that way. I mean, what do you mean? It should be pretty easy for you to find a quote where you are saying, "Hey, this is the this is the best weapon against armor, and it is a hammer," right? Uh, if such a quote exists, right? But A, we're assuming that this guy reads, and B, we're assuming that exists. And the answer is, as someone who has read these texts, I can tell you such quotes do not exist. There's not a single Renaissance expert I can think of off the top of my head that talks about hammers being better than swords against full plate. There is one British expert, contemporary British expert, that did write a treatise about poleaxes, where he said that poleaxes were better against armor. But that's one against all these dozens of other Renaissance experts. So, and again, like this guy, if he did some digging, he would have found it, but he didn't. uh, it is kind of funny. Maybe I shouldn't have wrote concede, because he could have brought that up. But at the end of the day, even that guy was. He didn't say that the sword was bad. He said that he preferred the pole hammer or pole arm. Fior's manual is a list of situations, provides the optimal response in those situations. That's not the context of what I was talking about. The only thing that could be, if you could use, okay, if you could use your sword optimally against plate armor, there wouldn't be a need for a separate section. And you can actually tell that this guy did not read Fior's Flower of Battle, because the normal techniques that are described by Fior, or the half sword and the Mordhau, he writes about them in the unarmored section as well. So the idea that, oh, this is a specialized technique that you can only use against armor, or that you will only use against armored opponents, and therefore we can conclude that the great sword is not effective against armor because where you have to use a specialized technique. No, that's completely wrong, because these quote unquote specialized techniques are also being used against unarmored opponents. I dropped the quote again. And here, fascinating. Would it shock you to learn that half sorting and Mordau are depicted in unarmored contexts in the books by the experts? I would guess so, given their presence completely obliterates your argument. For example, right, because he's talking about specialized techniques, Fior del Liberi's Flower of Battle features half sorting extensively in the unarmored two-handed sword section, including blade grips for thrusts, disarms, and leverages. Pommel strikes are also shown in close hordes and counters. Close holds encounters. Depict fighters in civilian or padded attire engaging in these techniques. Codex Dobringer, again, in the Blastfetzen, or unarmored portion of this German treatise, half swording is illustrated for precise thrust and wrestling with the sword, transitioning from guards like Von Tag or Flug. Pommel strikes appear in close range counters. Oh, that's 2 for 2. Opera Nova by, I'm not reading that, features straights of the half sword for unarmored two-handed sword, woodcut illustrations. And I did check. I went through these just to make sure I wasn't misremembering them. And we do have pictures. And again, some of these guys are wearing Gambrisons, but I think in the context of, unarmored fighting, I do think, since we did count Gambrisons as 30 armor, I do think it's fair to include these. Although, to be honest, a Gambrison does make you a lot more armored against slashing attacks, so that's why you would use the half sword. But at the same time, 30 armor, whatever, we're going to count it, right? And then I did bring up 2 others. And then for some reason YouTube doesn't seem to be showing this reply, so I reposted it. a summary of it, and okay, and then I left it off. Right, that was a month ago, and then he said, and I came back to this video because of my debate with Sergio, just because I saw as I was going through my comments this guy again, and I was like, well, I might as well. Let's see. Your arguments as to why Zweihanders are effective against armor, boiling down to them being versatile enough to dramatically change their uses against different opponents. Either the way you would use a dagger in the grapple or the way you would use a hammer. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. My argument is that doing so is an acknowledgement that the dagger or hammer is so much better in that situation. You are effectively just switching to those instead of using the sword at all. Well, again, there's the advantage of flexibility, right? The hammer is slower, again, because the weight is concentrated at the tip, right? So you cannot change directions with a hammer as effectively as you can with a sword. Secondly, the dagger, you have the reach disadvantage, right? And reach is not as important as many people think it is. It is in the terms of full plate. You will see daggers being used, and with good reason, because at the end of the day, if you can get into a grapple and stick your dagger into your opponent's visor, you will. This is a difference of definitions of terms. There's not something a reasoned argument interacts with. I would agree with that, right? At the end of the day, we are kind of disagreeing in the context of how much we can argue that the greatsword is effective against armor. I would agree with on that, but I do think at the end of the day, what the debate originally started was swords are garbage at penetrating plate armor, and I think him and I might agree. I would hope so. That is not true. At the end of the day, you can use it as a dagger or a hammer, or you can do both, and that's the advantage of flexibility. Uh, your rebuttals and description of what you think the technique does instead. A bludgeon that can also put a sharp bit through a gap in armor. Yeah, I mean you can call that a bad hammer. I call it a good sword, right? Warhammers frequently had spikes for the purpose that you're claiming is the difference between the two. It's not a difference. Oh, there's other differences, right? Like I said, the difference in weighting, right? The difference in where that weight is. The lack of hand protection, right? I got a detailed look quick is about what to do after crouching a lance and breaking it. That means it is talking to a knight intending to fight from horseback. Switching to a Zweihander isn't an option for the listener. Carrying one in position they can draw from just doesn't work. Conversation about the effectiveness of Zweihanders against armor. Bringing up a quote where they aren't even usable is irrelevant. Bringing it up as a supporting argument indicates that you didn't actually read it. I don't think this is about definitions anymore. Yeah, I think you just don't know what you're talking about. Well, you clearly didn't read my analysis of this because I laid out why the quote is relevant, right? Because again, advice to grapple, right? Which again, just to reiterate, he says that grappling was not for combat, right? Not for fighting one guy in an alley, not two groups of 10, right? And I assume we can scale this up into uh, medieval battlefields. I'm assuming he's saying that grappling is not for medieval battlefields when he says this. I think that's a fair assumption. It is a fair assumption because, two groups of 10, we can scale that up, right? And then he says they were used in combat as desperation attempts. And again, the quote very clearly, directly states that you shall grapple with all the weapons you have at your disposal, grapple with the estoc, grapple with a sword. So that's why I brought it up. And I made that absolutely clear, right? Uh, Sword is used first and then advises you to grapple, right? As something you should actively be seeking, right? And he is apparently not reading because he doesn't address that at all, and instead switches to a very poor straw man, which very pathetic, I think, right? Let's see. Quoted source doesn't even have Zweihanders on the list. Stocks being the best option against plate armor makes sense. That's literally what they were designed for. Yeah, they were. And it's a type of sword, right? And the whole point of this debate is swords are garbage at penetrating armor, right? And, well, we have the stock, right? We have the arming sword. And if the arming sword is good against armor, Oh, why wouldn't this Y-hander be? The stock, that's kind of fair. It is a bit thicker. It is when I say thicker, I mean in terms of blade stiffness, right? Why are you even bringing that up? And again, I clarified not only that, and I said, and a stock is a 200 sword, so I brought it into the comparison. Empire Great Swords are definitely not using the stocks. I never said that they were. Stocks are pure thrusting weapons, yeah, but Zweihander could thrust too. Uh, he says I'm moving goalposts. Again, you are not reading my comments. You're not reading my comments. You're not addressing the grapple, right? And I brought that up again, and he says, "You have tagged one is fallacious. You're using them." I think they are okay, not interchangeable, but at the same time, the fact that one is good against armor and it's very similar to a great sword and the arming sword as well. Again, we're talking about swords, right? They kind of are interchangeable because the argument is again swords. If he said IRL great swords or IRL Zoe handers, he might have an argument, but that's what we were talking about. Let's see. Taking yes. And then we talk about, well, there's no point to this debate. And I think that is true, but I have fun, right? I like debating, and I would like to convince this guy, but I don't think he will be convinced. We brought up his stocks. They have the armor tag. He talked about the exact. I, I don't know what he's talking about here. Wasn't following the rules. That is not a quotation I made. I'm gonna go through my. All right, wasn't following the rules. Let's see. Yeah, I never wrote wasn't following the rules. By your 80 armor definition, great swords are totally justified to have armor piercing since this Winder would be plenty effective against lance necked armor. And I mean, that's not really a real argument. It's just something I tossed out there. Let's see how he tries to. Let's see. I mean, yeah, I am interested in scoring imaginary points. Although, you gotta admit, you are too, some guy, because you very intentionally misrepresented my argument and my reason for bringing up that quote. In order for any quality of S-Stock to be relevant in a discussion about Zweihander's, a relationship needs to be established between the two types of weapons. Uh, he's going to try and debunk my argument. Zweihanders can thrust too. Yeah, they can. They are two-handed swords that can thrust and are good against armor. Because Zweihanders are A and B, they're also C. They would, in order for that to be a valid logical conclusion, the overlap between sets A and B would be entirely contained within C. That all two-handed swords that can thrust are good against armor. Yeah, that's a fair argument. Stocks are different from Zweihanders in ways that meaningfully affect their effectiveness versus armor, particularly in the thrust. Yes and no, right? At the end of the day, it's a stiff piece of metal, right? And the stock is slightly stiffer, but no, I would say not to the degree that it actually affects anything in terms of this debate. Uh, this is also completely irrelevant to the debate. He makes up this complete argument that I'm not making, rebuts it, and then and again he continues to insist that this is an irrelevant source. But again, I cited it for two reasons, right? Because of the grappling. Oh, excuse me. The armor the great swords are wearing would provide little to no the great swords effectiveness, and these are all points that I have already made. We're just repeating ourselves at this point. Demonstrate the usage of two-handed swords in the context of combat in full plate. To demonstrate grappling in melee combat was not a last resort, but something knights actively pursued. And go away. That right there is what triggered me to make this video. I'm not gonna go away. Uh, that actually just got me to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make a video, and that was just 11 minutes ago, guys. That just got me so irritated. But you know, you're just a random guy on the internet trying to tell me what to do. I'm not gonna, right? Uh, but just a recap, right? Quick recap. Initial guy says swords are good, not good against armor. I brought up multiple sources explaining why that's wrong. This guy tries to debate, tries to say that grappling is not something that you would use in combat. Tries to say that grappling is not something that you would go for, right? He was saying that it is something you do as a desperate last resort. And again, I provided a quote, multiple quotes. Actually, no, just one quote, but I also cited multiple sources that yes, grappling is something you do, right? So overall, he has yet to rebut that grappling is something that can be done in, or something that was gone for in Renaissance era combat, and he has yet to rebut that yes, multiple swords are good against armor. And if we're talking specifically in the context of great swords, the Estak I do think is similar enough. And this is really that last part. This is, I will say, fair enough. You know, the Estak maybe is not a good comparison, not the greatest of comparisons, but it's close enough to baseline that I like it. And I'll see you later.